what you're arguing for is a kind of feminism that says, actually, all the differences between men and women, it's totally true in the aggregate, in these two different types. But on rare occasion, there's going to be some woman who comes
not that rare.
along.
Like, let's say, gender roles. Like, let's say most people, let's say 70 to 80% of people will fall into natural gender roles. But then there's still 20% of our population that may not. And do we make a society where we force that 20% into these roles, or do we allow choice? I think a lot of feminism, the cornerstone of feminism, is choice for women. You can't stay home.
I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure, because there was a famous debate between Betty Friedan, who was the prominent American feminist, and Simone de Beauvoir, one of the most famous feminists of the 20th century. It was in 1975, and Betty Friedan said what you said. She said, look, I think we should give women a choice. Maybe they want to go out into the workplace, or maybe they want to stay home and raise their kids, but they should have a choice. And Simone de Beauvoir, who was a more consistent and intelligent feminist, said there can't be a choice. And the reason there can't be a choice is that if given the choice, most women would stay at home. And if most women stay at home, women will not be free. If we want true women's liberation, women must be forced to be free. And Friedan recoiled from this because she knew it wasn't going to play well in Peoria. But Simone de Beauvoir had the right point, and I think the more consistent feminists have agreed with her.
I don't know. I mean, feminism has, it's gone so many different directions, so to pick the feminists that we don't agree with for this debate, I don't know if that's conducive to...
Also, I'm not necessarily sure when you're saying oh no, most women would stay at home. That's a choice that they would have. Because when you look at the uprisings of feminism, or when it gained the most traction, it was post-war era. Partly because of the reason why is because during these war eras, men went out, they were drafted, they had to go fight, et cetera, et cetera. Women were expected to take up more traditional male spaces, work when the men came back, what ended up happening is that a lot of women did not want to leave the jobs that they had. They wanted to keep the somewhat level of financial independence that they were able to gain. And that's why we see these huge feminist uprisings during those periods of time. So it seems to me, if you're saying that most women would stay home, that just wouldn't happen. Women would have not had these feminist movements go forward.
Well, the feminists didn't want to leave their jobs, but women broadly perhaps did. So anecdotally, people write in a lot and they tell me, Michael, at least while my kids are little, I'd love to stay home and raise them. Maybe I'll go back to work after, but I just can't. You can't raise a family in America for the average person today on one income. And that's a result of women entering the workforce and wages decrease, which is why not only the radical left, but also the more commercially minded right wing was in favor of that. It's the same reason they're in favor of mass migration. It just lowers wages for people. A lot of women, however, seem to feel not that they have the choice to go to work, but that they have to. And this is expressed in a famous study that came out of UPenn and was published by Yale in 2008, which was the paradox of declining female happiness. And I love the way this study opens up. Right in the abstract it says, despite the past 35 years, I'm paraphrasing, but despite the past 35 years showing so much marked progress and improvement in the lives of women, women's happiness, according to this meta-analysis, has declined, both absolutely and relative to men. So it's not even just that everyone got more miserable because of, a bad economy or something. Women in particular became less happy, despite all these objective improvements to their lives. So to me, the obvious rejoinder to that is, well, maybe those objective improvements, namely feminism, that's the thing that happened between 1973 and 2008, maybe that wasn't an objective good. Maybe that was just illusory.
Well, to me, the obvious rejoinder of that is that women are becoming disillusioned with the life they had prior. They're leaving the cave, so to speak, allegorically. And also, I don't think you should use self-reported happiness as a metric of justice or any objective good, because you can plot self-reported happiness with pretty much any variable. Highest reported crime, violent crime in the United States, also is directly correlated to self-reported happiness. Does that mean one causes the other? No. Does that mean we should think
what do you mean by that?
Highest
violent crime is correlated?
I'm just saying in the periods of time when we've had the most violent crime in the United States, there's also a correlation between highest rates of self-reported happiness.
Well, not according to the survey I just cited, right? If happiness has been declining steadily, especially for women since 1973 to 2008, you had a major crime spike in the early 90s, but you didn't have a major spike in happiness. So perhaps there's some survey that you're referring to in some city somewhere, but it wouldn't.
But also, even women living traditional lifestyles are seeing a downfall in happiness. So why is it that the women who are still living the type of lifestyle that you would probably prescribe to women are also having a decrease in happiness?
Also,
I'm not convinced of that.
The Institute of Family Studies did a big, and there's a lot of data out there that actually children make you less happy. So there is this problem happening where we're like, okay, why are people less happy? But we don't know. We don't know what it is.
I'm not so sure. Again,
and then you would expect then that if you looked at the most unhappiest countries, you would expect Canada, the Nordic countries, Scandinavian countries, because they're very egalitarian, and you're not seeing that they actually have higher happiness levels.
Well,
than
they have the highest
here.
rates of alcoholism in the world. You think of Denmark, Norway, Iceland in particular.
But
So I don't know how happy they are.
Now you're changing, but if we're gonna just go by what makes people
I don't think
happy,
alcoholics
I
are
don't
like the
know if
happiest people.
I think there are arguments to be made about like community and those things may make people less happy. But this idea that's because women aren't having children, when we also have data, a lot of data that shows children, especially in the United States, has the biggest happiness gap. And then we're seeing that other countries that are more feminist are also not having, like, if you compare like Scandinavian countries to like the East, like my parents are immigrants from Iran. Iran has really high unhappiness levels. A lot of countries
Naturally,
yeah, exactly. So I don't know if you can say that this is causing that, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, Nordic countries also have much more homogeneity, which is correlated with political happiness. But so they're all of those differences.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the point about children making you unhappy and the point about leaving the cave, I think those are both a little bit of a cope, because they're belied by the fact that if it were just that women were coming into their own now and they were recognizing the oppression of which they were not conscious previously, then why would they keep getting less and less happy? You know, at a certain point, aren't you supposed to turn the corner and become more happy in your independence? But that's not what's happened. For 35 years, it just gets worse, worse, and worse, including relative to men. And then for children, you look over the past, 70 plus years now, 74 years, since 1950 to present day, the marriage rate has dropped by 60%, and the birth rate has dropped by 50%. So just looking at the whole society, we are having many, many fewer children than we were before, and yet we're much less happy.
Even like
sure,
places like Pakistan are having less kids.
Sure, I'm just pointing out. You're saying that having fewer children makes you happier, and I'm saying we're having many fewer children, and Americans are much less happy. And you see this even beyond just
but that's
random
not,
surveys.
You can't link that.
I kind of want to push back on this idea that we've gotten more unhappy as time has progressed, because at least to my understanding, what's happened in the last 20 or 30 years is an increased awareness of like mental health and what that means. So it's not necessarily that people were really happy before and now suddenly are miserable.
Yeah.
It's just that now we're actually having data where people can talk openly about their mental health, unhappiness, and not be as stigmatized as before. Mm-hmm. If we look at the 1950s and even like housewives around that time, we see like there is actually like a huge rate of like narcotic usage and basically like prescriptions to that level. So I'm not necessarily, if I would go as far to say, we've gotten unhappiness as time, we've gotten more unhappy as time has gone by. I would say more likely, oh no, we've been able to properly report, measure, and assess mental health as time has gone by.
And medicate.
Listen, I'm very inclined towards your view that social scientific studies are bunk. I mean, there's a major replication prices. I think it's all ridiculous. I will cite those social science stats when they serve my argument, because why not? That's what we do these days. But I agree. I'm skeptical of measuring happiness and all the rest of it. But on the mental health point, I think here we do have some pretty firm data, and it contradicts the argument you're making, which is right now, 1 in 5 middle-aged women in the country is hooked on antidepressant drugs. On any given day, they're taking them. Women are 2.5 times as likely as men to take these depression drugs. It is ubiquitous at this point. And the rates of taking depression drugs are going up. It's getting much worse. So if we're not getting less and less happy, why do people keep taking more and more depression drugs?
Well, why were housewives in the 50s downing like a bottle of wine at lunch every day? I'm just saying now we're seeing...
I'm not so sure. I mean, these are anecdotes.
We're supplanting self-medication now with actually like medically backed drugs that actually help women with their mental health issues.
I don't know that they help.
It's also now that when you're sad, you just go to the doctor and they give you antidepressant drugs. I don't know how much more depressed people actually are, other than the fact that they're just dishing them out to everybody.
And they're dishing them out more and more and more. Sure, you can blame the pharmaceutical industry or the medical industry. I'm just pointing out, in order to argue against these social science statistics, one has to just turn toward unfalsifiable anecdotes and memes. The housewives were all miserable in the 50s. They were secretly, drinking behind their husbands' backs. But I don't know, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. All I have are the data available to me, and the data are getting worse. Well, the data is just saying that
more people are on antidepressants. It's not telling you why. It's not telling you what caused it. It's not telling you...
Depression, presumably, is causing it.
That's what we're debating here, is what could have caused it. You're saying,
No, but I'm not saying, maybe they hate their husband, maybe they hate their kids, maybe they don't like the weather in their town.
Like, I think
but
ADHD
in any
is
case,
a great example of this. Anyone now can just be like, oh, I have trouble focusing. Does everyone have ADHD, or are people just getting these drugs? Like, these are questions that we should ask before we jump to a conclusion. That
no, I agree. Look, I think that they're pathologizing a lot of ordinary aspects of human nature. But I think part of the reason that we do that is because we're so radically misinterpreting human nature, which brings us right back to feminism. The clearest example of this is the transgender argument, which is all anyone ever talks about these days. I'm frankly sick of it. We know that men and women are different, but that shows you, a major confusion about human nature. If a man can become a woman, then we have been really wrong about anthropology for a long time. And most reasonable people know a man can't become a woman. But that error in human nature goes back much earlier than transgenderism. This is why I have pity for the feminists who are trans-exclusionary radical feminists, because they don't realize that it was their own ideology that led to this. The premise of transgenderism is that men and women are basically the same, so much so that one can become the other. But if that's true, then that has to come from somewhere, and where it came from was the redefinition of marriage, to say that a man and a woman is the same as a man and a man is the same as a woman and a woman. And that comes from the sexual revolution, and that comes from feminism, which says a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. I agree. These errors in human nature can lead to all sorts of problems.